Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, comic book fans from all over the world. Welcome back to another, quite late, quite delayed, Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what do I do for a living? Let's all say it together. I write comic books. So, yeah, I didn't, I missed the show. I missed the step on you, and I'm sorry, but I have a good excuse. I've been writing a lot. Last time out, I was finishing up a novel, doing the final rewrites and format and back and forth with my editor, and that takes up time. And then I jumped right on a screenplay. Yes, I'm writing a screenplay. If you've listened to these videos, you know over and over and over again, I don't want to write a screenplay. I don't like writing screenplays. I don't like the format and everything else, but I've been strongly encouraged to write this one, and by a lot of very talented people, so who are very persuasive. So I am writing a screenplay. I have a co-writer, thank God, because I can't format in first draft to save my life. So there we go. Also, other delays. You're continuing to have challenges from installing a new computer. Missing files, losing files, having to recreate files, having to reinstall programs and all the rest of it. It doesn't get any easier. They don't make it easy. Why can't? And I know I'm going to get a million. Well, not a million. I never get a million anything, but I'm going to get a couple of people commenting. You just port it over, or bring it down from the cloud, or use the Abita Jabita program. Yeah, okay. I don't know any of that, so I do it the old-fashioned way. I move things to an external hard drive and then plug the external hard drive into the new computer. But even that causes problems. Things just don't want to seem to translate. Damn you, Windows! And I'm going to get more comments. Yeah, you should get a Mac. You should go with Apple. Yeah. I've heard that. Half my life. Wow, that's weird, isn't it? I have literally heard that half my life. Half of my life has been in the age of information. Amazing. Anyway, that's not what you came here to hear about. You came here to hear about geeky stuff and comic books and stuff like that, and apparently James Bond. Tim Gilpin opens up he's the first one out of the bag of mail, and he says, with Amazon, MGM, starting work on its first James Bond movie, how do you think the film should depict Bond? It could show him as an established 00 agent which worked for Pierce Brosnan and his predecessors, or follow the franchise's approach with Daniel Craig introducing the recently promoted 007. Yeah, I don't know how they're going to do it. I'll tell you what I don't want to see, and I think all of you are going to agree with me. I don't want to see an origin story. I don't want an origin story. I don't care if they start with him in his first week as 007, his first assignment. That's fine, but I don't want to know anything about Bond's background. Beyond hints here and there. I damn sure don't want him to have some sort of trauma that he's working out, like seems to be the shortcut for lazy writers. But I have a lot of faith in the folks who are involved with this project. They've got, good stuff in their background. They've got a good track record. Of course, things can always go wrong, and who knows what Amazon is asking them to do. But I have a good feeling about this. And look, Amazon, brought you Reacher, Terminal List, a new Terminal List spin-off miniseries, a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't think Amazon would do. Because, as I've said before, Amazon has 3 heads in its entertainment department, and it all depends on where things land. And apparently, initially, the Bond franchise landed with the wrong head, and they had all kinds of crazy ideas, like a Moneypenny miniseries and things like that. And they fired her over this because the Bond franchise is potentially worth a lot for Amazon. There's absolutely no reason on earth that Amazon can't bring us a new Bond movie every year. Which has been a dream of mine since I saw Goldfinger. Why can't I see one of these every year? What's wrong with you guys? Giddy up. Let's get us more Bond out there. Now, if it's going to be set modern day, or as a lot of people would prefer, and personally I would prefer as well, set it during the Cold War, set it in the 60s. they've got a young enough actor to play it that he can play Bond for like another 15 years or more, and see the series move up in time. Anyway, I have good feelings about it. I'm going to stay optimistic. I'm not optimistic about a lot of things, but I'm going to remain optimistic about Bond until proven otherwise. So there you go. Next question. Donald Wands, or I don't know if you're German. Maybe it's Wands. Well, you're obviously German. The scenario is, I mean, German American, whatever. I'm off on a million tangents, but hey, it's my show. You can ask for your money back at the returns desk. Okay, Donald Juan says, the scenario is you've come into money and decide to invest your new fortune as the CEO of a publishing house, focusing on the creation of a new superhero universe. Since you're in charge, you get to set the rules that your new crew of writers must adhere to. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. First of all, I'd have to win Powerball twice before I would consider getting into publishing as a business. As the old saying goes, if you want to make $1 million in comics, start with $2 million. But it would be tempting, and I'm going to tell you, what I would do is very simple, and what I would do is what the comic book companies all should have done in the early 2000s, when they got to like 2010, and it was obvious the writing was on the wall, comic book sales were falling. The audience was largely disenchanted, and instead of driving them away with woke nonsense and things that violated the characters and violated the franchises, what they should have done is go to top creative teams, writer pencilers, and say, we're going to give you character X. Now, this is how I got every single job I ever had at DC. I said, hey, you want to write Green Arrow? You want to write Guy Gardner? It wasn't pitch, whatever, okay? So you go to established pros who have a track record, and there's tons of them out there who are underemployed at the moment, and you say to the writer and penciler, I want you to do character X, and I want you to go wherever you want with it. Just go nuts. This is the way comics used to be done. They used to be concerned with overall continuity back in the past. And I would say to these different creative teams, on all my major titles, just go where you want to go. And we'll figure out the continuity later, because that's what they did in the old days. And that essentially is beginning a new continuity, but it's going to be creator-driven, not editorially driven. I mean, look at the Star Wars bar of editors you have now at the big two comic book company. Would you want them running anything? Do you think that they have what it takes to tell any experienced, seasoned comic book creator what to do? They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the experience. They don't have the taste. They don't have the common sense. All they have is their own confidence in themselves, and that they're always right. And they're not always right, because comic book sales are in the toilet. So bring in a bunch of seasoned pros, and there's a bunch of them, and assemble the teams and say, go at it. Just go crazy. I guarantee you that, first of all, it'll spark a whole lot of interest in the comic book community. And secondly, because you'd want to check it out, right? And secondly, you're harnessing the energy, this creative energy, in a good way. And thirdly, I absolutely guarantee you that a dozen of those titles would be hits. And the ones that aren't hits, okay, that didn't work out. Give it to another team. Give it to a different team. And say, go for it. And that's the way comics used to be done. It used to be done on something called merit. They used to be concerned with something called sales. They used to lay awake at night staring at the ceiling over earnings. But apparently that's not a thing anymore. It's just, hey, whose ox has been gored, and what can I do about it? My own personal petty little agenda that I have. I'm going to present it in comic book form because I don't care about the comics. I just care about getting my message out. So there you go. I heard a great quote today. Kind of relates to this. Winston Churchill. A fanatic is someone who can't change their mind and can't change the subject. Oh, that Winnie. Okay, Christopher Cohen. Speaking of Spidey, I might have got the questions out of order here. Speaking of Spidey, your regular audience here knows your favorite Spidey run was Ditko. But were there other runs or story arcs you enjoyed in the 70s and into the 80s? If so, can you share which ones? Yeah, around Spider-Man 100, I was reading the titles up to then. When they put out that Spider-Man magazine, it kind of brought me back to Spider-Man. I don't know, some of you are probably old enough to remember. They put out like a black and white magazine of Spider-Man. That kind of got me back into the title. And this run with Gil Kane and John Romita basically sharing art chores. Because Romita was nothing against Mr. Romita. The man was an absolute angel, consummate professional, hardworking gentleman. But he had a problem with monthly deadlines. And so, they brought in Gil Kane. And the story's just crazy. The title just goes nuts. Kind of like what I was saying before. You give the creators their head and just say, go for it. And, we end up with a further mutating Spider-Man where he grows 4 more arms. I mean, stuff like that it just blew me away. And then he goes to the Savage Land. I mean, I was just, it's good stuff. There's a lot of great energy there. And now the other Spider-Man run, I kind of fell off the title after a while. I think Ross Andrew, I was reading through the Ross Andrew run, and maybe after him, whoever took over after him, I kind of lost interest. Now I came back for Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man, when the team of Bill Mantlo and Ed Hannigan were on the title, and I really liked their stuff because it was very Ditko-esque. It reminded me a lot of Ditko. Of course, they brought a lot of themselves to it and a lot of great concepts, Cloak and Dagger and other stuff. But I really liked this run. It was a good run on this book, and but that's the last time I really read Spider-Man regularly. I know this title went on, but I think after Hannigan and Mantlo had his tragic accident, and I stopped reading after that. So, hey, you get a twin spin. Hey, we got if you're watching, we've got some new spin graphics that I had to create because of the computer. I lost all my old spins, but you get the you get the benefit. Anyway, Christopher Cohen again. You mentioned Peter Parker should be written as never arriving as a man in full. Do you consider marriage should have been included as part of his evolution, or do you think marriage was a mistake for the character? I don't think marriage was a bad idea. I mean, they were trying to get sales up and maintain interest in the book, and I don't think it was a bad idea at all. But, as many of us will have to admit, marriage does not turn you into a man in full. You can still be a goofball, and I certainly was. You can be married and still be a goofball. You can be married and still do lots and lots of things to annoy your new wife, to distraction. I mean, I still do. I've been married almost 40 years, but I can still raise my wife's hackles. Any of us can, because we're geeks. I'm talking to you, my loyal audience. You've been there, you know this. So what I think makes you a man in full is when you have children. And now you got to grow up. You've got to grow up. And I've seen this happen. I've seen guys that I would have bet would have made terrible fathers and wouldn't have been responsible. And when they have that kid, and when they see that kid for the first time, and maybe they're in the delivery room, which is a real eye-opener, there's a paradigm shift. And I've seen it over and over again, and I saw it in myself. There's a paradigm shift. All of a sudden, you're not an overgrown adolescent anymore. You have real responsibilities for another living thing that you would do anything for. And those feelings come on you like flipping on a switch. like you downloaded a new program. And now you're a different person. You're literally a different person. Your whole world, at least it should, your whole world outlook changes. And you grow up. And I think, if they had continued the storyline and Mary Jane and Peter Parker had a child, you would have, if you were being honest as a writer, you would have a change in Peter Parker. In my opinion, in my version of Peter Parker, where he never really gets it together, he would have to get it together to some extent when they had a child. So there you go. That's my philosophy. My philosophy. Okay. Triple spin. Christopher Cohen is back again, and with part of his question obscured. Hold on here. Okay. On your mention of the editor circle jerk at Marvel, what year did you start to observe this nepotism emerge, and do you have thoughts on why Tom, I'm assuming it was under his editor-in-chief tenure, let this behavior proceed when it was likely impacting sales? While you refer to the rising tide, surely he realized this wasn't because of this approach, but rather the initial sensation of Image keeping titles afloat across the industry. The circle jerk was editors who would hire other editors to write a title for them. And there were 3 editors most notorious for this. And they would begin, a number 1, and it would be highly promoted and everything else, and the sales would be good. But they were empty, forgettable. Now, okay, there's going to be a few of you out there and go, I was a huge fan of Night Thrasher. Well, maybe because you were 8 years old and it was your first comic, and you're thinking about it nostalgically. But these titles were wretched and tiresome. And because the editors were editors, they were able to hire top talent to work on them. So the books looked good, but they were, just meh. just not good. There's never going to be a Darkhawk movie. Sleepwalker is never going to get an action figure. Nobody remembers these titles, and that's for a very good reason. But that's what was going on. Now you're going to go, well, didn't that affect sales because they didn't sell that well and everything else? Well, the pity is they did sell because everything was selling then. This was early 90s, and comics were just in a boom phase, and every comic was moving. Every comic was being ordered at the comic shops, and and I'm sure a lot of comic retailers were stuck with a deep inventory of these 3 titles and some others. But that's what was going on. Retailers were able to take a loss on some titles because they were selling so much of so many others. I remember once a retailer complaining to me that he was stuck, quote unquote stuck, with 150 copies of Robin #1, the first Robin miniseries. And he was like, I had 150 copies, still have them in my storeroom. I said, but how many did you sell? And he goes, thousands. So you made a lot of money, and you only over-ordered by a little bit, less than 10% over-ordering. That ain't bad. That ain't bad, and you'll sell them eventually. I even said, I'll come to your store and sign them all, and you'll sell them. So anyway, yes, Tom DeFalco was in charge, and why did he let this go on? Because the titles weren't losing money. They weren't doing great, but they weren't losing money. Their sales were, eventually, of course, their sales totally collapsed when the whole market collapsed. But for a while there, they were selling along, mid-range, Marvel mainstream titles. And the thing is, at the time, the editors were double dipping because they were making money off the royalties for writing it, but they were also making money off the royalties for editing it, because at the time Marvel editors were earning royalties. So this was a nice little grift they had going. And they wisely, I'll hand it to these 3 guys, they wisely did not simply take over an existing title that was selling well. They sort of kept this in the background, let's create new characters. And, I don't know why, because in Marvel, if you create new characters, it's a lousy deal. But anyway, back to Tom DeFalco. I talked to Tom DeFalco one time because he was taking a lot of chances, and I thought they were good chances. They were doing a series of dinosaur comics, doing a series of Civil War comics, trying to break out into a new market. And I think they did well with the dinosaurs. I don't think they did well with the Civil War. But I asked him, I said, man, you're taking a lot of risks. I said, I really admire that. You're trying to break out, get to a new audience. And he said, Marvel's so profitable now that we can afford to do a few things that lose money. We can afford to risk. We've got a lot of chips on the table, and we can afford to lose a few, which I thought was smart business sense. Unfortunately, that philosophy continued on with other editors-in-chief when the companies were losing money. They thought, it's okay to lose money. No, now it's not okay to lose money because it's not coming in. And of course, once the collapse happened in the early 90s, everything got, drawn back. Everything, these books were no longer tolerated and got canceled en masse. So, but I got to hand it to Tom. Tom is an underrated editor-in-chief for Marvel. Smart guy, very smart guy. Unfortunately, the people that followed him were not. I think Marvel would have been in better shape if Tom had continued on into the 2000s as the Marvel editor. Quadruple spin. You're racking them up here, sir. Christopher Cohen is back with, while on the topic of believability, I'm all over the place on your questions. I'm sorry. What are your thoughts on billionaire superheroes keeping construction of their secret bases, quote unquote, off the books? That is, Bruce has had significant modifications made to his Batcave over the years, so how does he ensure construction firms he contracts for this don't question that he is getting them to do the work for, or contract workers not leaking the information on the streets? This is an awesome question. I love this question. To my mind, the Batcave obviously evolved over time. I mean, Bruce and Alfred, Bruce discovers this cave under the manor, and it's just a cave. And they figure out a way to make it accessible to the surface so that they can get a vehicle out and everything else. And I can imagine that Alfred and Batman would be capable, later with the help of Robin, of setting something like that up. But not the extensive array of stuff and levels and, engineering challenges that the Batcave would have presented to them later on. And, so you go, well, that's ridiculous. He would have to hire an outside construction firm just to shore up this stuff, just to make sure the whole freaking cave didn't come down on him. And, through the years, writers have added and added and added to the Batcave. I added a lot of stuff to the Batcave, including a screen, a steel mesh screen above the activity area of the Batcave to catch guano from the bats, so that Batman and Alfred didn't come down to the cave every day and everything was covered with bat shit. So and I think I put in a thing where they had these sound emitters that would keep bats out of the active Batcave area. But if I didn't think of that, I should have. Anyway, of course it's ridiculous that, just as it's ridiculous that they would build a Batmobile. I mean, world's greatest detective, world's toughest guy, Alfred, the world's most loyal servant. They're not automotive engineers. They couldn't build a car, especially not a car like the Batmobile. They couldn't build an awesome car. And, these are things I introduced to the Bat mythos that, I was the first guy to write that basically Bruce picks the Batmobile off the lot and then customizes it. Now, I had come up during Nightfall, at the end of Nightfall, a very elegant solution as to how Wayne Manor could have been rebuilt over the Batcave without the construction crew discovering the caves underneath. And to me, it was a very elegant solution that was rejected by Denny O'Neil. But I still like to think actually happened. In my head, I can see this scene where the construction workers come out to the manor, which they've built off-site. They've built at another site and they've built it on a super thick concrete pad. And they come out the next day to do, put the shutters on, or maybe, finish up the painting, and the manor's gone. And then the next scene is Batman basically thanking Superman, because Superman picked up the manor and moved it in position over the cave, and then all that's necessary is to create the entrances to the cave, which Batman and Alfred were perfectly capable of doing. And in fact, I can see where Bruce Wayne would reach out to other superheroes who know his secret identity to get help with the engineering challenges of creating and maintaining the Batcave. But this was rejected by Denny. I understood. Denny wanted to keep Batman compartmentalized away from the rest of the DCU, so that when you read a Batman story, you didn't go, well, if he's having such a hard time with this guy, why doesn't he just call Green Lantern? We didn't want that possibility in the reader's mind. So I can see that. But I thought, just this once, this is a problem that his good friend Superman could fix in a nonce. So, what are you going to do? Jason Shepard. Chuck is the casual version of Charles. Does anyone call you Charles? No. Except when I'm at the doctor's office. Everybody calls me Chuck. Everybody always has called me Chuck. My dad's name was Charles too, but everybody called him Duke. My mom called him Charles, but everybody else called him Duke. I've told that story before where he got the name Duke. But I've always been Chuck. One time we moved into a new house when I was a kid, and we had a neighbor lady who was hard of hearing. And she was always asking my mother about Chicky. How's Chicky? And my mother would always go, who's Chicky? Your son, Chicky. No. And no one called me Chucky. I did not like that at all. So yeah, I've always been Chuck. Jason Shepard again. I'm actually giving you a twin spin. Too late. What is your opinion of the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie? Personally, I think it's a poor adaptation of Robert E. Howard, but it's a great movie. It creates a world that feels realistic and fantastic at the same time. The action is great. The musical score by Basil Polidorus is one of my favorites. I feel Arnold Schwarzenegger does a pretty good job here. He's not the movie star he would eventually become, but he definitely has magnetism. He's not playing Howard's Conan, but he does the best he can with the script and the limitations as an actor. I feel like Jason Momoa from the 2011 movie was far better Conan in an inferior movie. Not a fan of the first movie, certainly not a fan of the second movie. It doesn't feel like Howard. I don't like the Wheel of Pain origin to give him the muscles. I think the filmmakers, remember these are Dino De Laurentiis movies, I think that they wanted the muscles explained. Where's a guy get built like that? And I met Schwarzenegger just before he began filming this movie. He was at our local ABC affiliate to appear on a morning show to promote a book, a book about bodybuilding, and I went in the green room and talked to him. A super nice guy. I was in a janitor's outfit. I look like I escaped from Arkham. I had an orange jumpsuit on. And very nice guy. Talked to me for 20 minutes until they called him to go on the air. And what we talked about was Conan. I just said, hey, what are you working on? And he says, oh, they want me to do Conan. And we started talking about Conan. He'd read the comics. He said, I'm working my way through the Robert E. Howard stories. And he said, I said, well, how do you prepare to play a role like that? And he said, well, I'm not training anymore because I don't want to look like a weightlifter. I don't want to look like Steve Reeves. Of course, he looks enormous in the movie, but he wasn't. He says, I haven't been training for months in preparation, basically trying to lose some of his muscle mass. Of course, he still looked huge to me, but I was taller than him, which pleased me no end. He's 6 foot. I'm 6'3", so I got that on him, but that's about it. So, but yeah, I didn't think the Conan movies were Conan at all. They didn't remind me of Howard at all. And I agree with you, Jason Momoa was a better look. But I never saw this movie. The trailer kind of turned me off. I thought some of the casting was kind of weird. Stephen Lang as the bad guy. I love Stephen Lang. He's a tremendous actor, but boy, he looked out of place in this movie as the bad guy. You really needed someone like James Earl Jones, someone who looked more exotic. Yeah, there you go. Ace Mowick, with his passing on June 30th, do you have any comments on Jim Shooter's method of editing, his importance to the history of comics, or even how fans believe some of the nonsense stories by former colleagues that came out of their dislike of how the boss ran the bullpen, even though there's no evidence that contradicts the stories? Jim Shooter, obviously talented guy, very talented guy. And he was able to take what he did at Marvel and go over to Valiant and recreate it. That's something. That's like having 2 hit TV shows. To do something and then go show that it wasn't a fluke. You could do it again. And first time he's doing it with an established company. Second time he does it, out of thin air. Does it with a bunch of completely forgotten gold key characters, and does an awesome job. And basically he creates a company totally in his image. And yeah, he had storytelling rules that I heard nothing but bitching about, from artists and from writers. He had rules about the Marvel Universe, things like that. But every editor has these. Every editor-in-chief has these prejudices, but they weren't crippling prejudices. Dan DiDio at DC, he had all these prejudices about continuity of characters he liked and characters he disliked. And his decisions, based on his prejudices, were always disastrous. They always harmed the company. Shooters didn't harm the company. He was just basically trying to bring consistency to the work, consistency to the continuity. He wanted to keep putting out good comics every month, and he was very concerned about the way the comics looked, the way they read, and the rest of it. And I think all of that was a good influence. And of course, it made a lot of editors and a lot of creatives have to work harder, and especially editors, they don't like being asked to work hard because they basically have a job. Their job is going to lunch and talking on the phone. And they didn't want to have this whip hand behind them telling them to make sure their creatives got handed in their work on time, all the rest of things like that. So and there are stories about Shooter, and some of them aren't made up. I mean, he was a complex guy, and I have heard a couple bad stories about him, about how he treated creators, and they are true because I trust these creators. I trust. Others that would tell stories, and you're right, it was like, wow, it just sounded like he hurt your feelings. I mean, he didn't really do anything bad, he just hurt your feelings. And I know you, and you need your feelings hurt every once in a while. But yeah, he did some bad stuff. But then on the flip side, I've heard from creators wonderful stories about things that he did for them. So he's a complicated guy. He was kind of like Walt Disney in that aspect. These horror stories about Walt Disney, and there was people that Walt Disney he walked with Jesus. So when you're this kind of personality, and he was forceful personality, you're going to bruise some people. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I heard one story which I will never share that it's pretty rotten what he did. But that's just part of his story. It doesn't mean the guy was rotten. I mean, Hitler was a war hero. What can I say? People are complicated. Hey, I got these really cool postcards, and I'll send you a few signed by me if you join me at Subscribestar Chuck Dixon, where for $5 a month you get digital goodies every month and physical goodies. You might get free comics. Well, you will get free comics, especially when you first initially join your first month. You will get a package of signed comics worth far more than what you're paying for the subscription. And then I have different offers over the following months. I'm preparing one now for in the fall, a physical media. But every month you get digital goodies, unpublished stories, scripts, movie treatments, things like that never see the light of day beyond my hard drive. So there you go. As always, if you want to contact me, you go to brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to reach me. And I want to thank you all for watching, listening, subscribing, and all the rest, and especially your fantastic questions. As I've said before, thought I'd run out of questions years ago, but you people keep bringing stuff up and interesting topics to talk about and consider. And I appreciate the communication. I appreciate this little community we got going here. And I will see all of you, I hope, down the road.